It's great to be here. Like she said, I'm Colleen, right?
Yeah.
Married, 5 children. Our first kid just went to college this year. So we've gone through that big transition. I'm not sure which was the greater transition, him going to college or the last 2 weeks that he's come home. Because wow, things are just really, really different. And I think more for him, right? Like there's this all of this tension, mainly between him and my wife. I feel like I'm sitting back watching this whole thing unfold and taking notes. Like, I want to figure out how this works. But let me jump in because I want to give us some time to process. In this hour, I really want to encourage you to just interrupt me. How many of you are youth ministers, do youth ministry? So quite a few. How many of you work with teenagers? Okay, I've done that for 30 years or more. So that's my, they're always interrupting me. They're getting up and walking in and walking out, and eating food and talking to their friends while you're talking. So I'm very used to that kind of environment. So I actually want you to, I want you to wrestle a little bit with what I'm saying because I don't think this is going to be the typical kind of presentation that you might hear on discipleship. And I have some very strong convictions about what discipleship looks like and what it needs to be, and and that's caused huge problems for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like I've in some ways have lost my job a couple of times because of the convictions that I had. There's a lot of people that would want to believe that discipleship is something that's really easy. Let's throw in a DVD into a DVD player and hit play, and voila, we're discipling things. Okay? It just does not work like that. Having done this for many years, worked with lots of different kids, one of the things that I can just absolutely say for sure is it's actually different for every kid. That's the biggest learning curve that I've had is there is no one size fits all. And it literally requires a relationship to understand a kid and the way that they're kind of wired and how they think and process things to be able to disciple them. And the only way that you can know that is to get close enough to them to actually understand the wiring, right? So I'm going to share more of what I would call a framework. How could you set up a framework with the kinds of things that you need to make fallow ground for discipleship, where a seed can really grow, right? But I can't give you a silver bullet because I'm just absolutely convinced it doesn't exist. There isn't one program, there isn't one resource, there isn't one thing that you can go out and buy, and bam, you're going to start making all these disciples, right?
Sounds exactly right. Saying the same thing, no silver bullet.
Oh, good.
No specific program.
I'm in line, see? I can't believe I'm actually agreeing with them. The big criticism of me is like I'm always stirring up conflict because
You're welcome. You're in Canada.
So, one of the things that I will say that I've spoken several times up here in Canada, everyone laughs at my jokes up here. For all the years of youth ministry, like I would speak at youth events, and I would say things that I thought was funny, and no one would laugh at all. And then I'd come up to Canada, and everyone would be laughing, and I was like, I love it up here. Some of you need to come down to the U.S., because no one gets my humor down there.
We're very polite.
Yeah. You just ruined 30 years.
We were taught to be polite.
So let me just start with a context, okay? You're familiar with Sherry Waddell? And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because if you want to dig into this more, you can go check out the book. Her second book, the follow-up book to Forming Intentional Disciples, I wrote a chapter in that specifically on youth and young adult ministry and discipleship. So I go into this into a lot more detail in that chapter. But I just want to benchmark something with particularly those of you who are doing youth ministry, right? I believe that there's a lot of myths out there kids today. Okay? And as I say these, I think you'll resonate with, yeah, that's not really true. At least I hope so. And again, I don't know what the differences are between the U.S. and Canada. This is definitely very, very predominant in the United States. So a myth about kids: teens hate their parents. Right? Like it's just not true. I mean, statistically, all kinds of surveys, you see it in the way that kids interact with their parents. I actually think we have just the opposite problem. Kids are too familiar with their parents. They're too friendly with their parents, and their parents are too friendly with them. We have parents not really being parents. We have parents being buddies, right? And so kids aren't, I mean, maybe 25 years ago, kids would be anemic to being around their parents and wouldn't want to be around their parents because they were more rebellious. It's just not the case culturally today. Okay, so it's a myth, right? Teens need to be completely independent of adults. Okay? That's a myth, right? Kids surveyed actually articulate, like 75–80% of kids surveyed will say that one of their strongest desires is to have meaningful conversations with adults, particularly their parents. What's ironic is we actually have a generation of kids who desire to be in relationship and conversation, dialogue with older people, and we have a whole generation of adults who think kids don't want anything to do with them, right? So the myth, it actually just continues to get perpetuated. Now again, if you go back 20 years, that wouldn't have been a myth, right? This is why a channel like MTV could actually come into existence, because the previous generation actually did want to be completely isolated from adults.
Now they're adults.
Right.
They think
that kids are the same way, and they're just not. Okay. So we have a fundamental miscusion, right? Teens don't like church. What do you think?
That's a myth.
It is a myth, okay? And this one's a little bit harder to grasp, right? Teens actually are drawn to spiritual. They're drawn to mystical. There's just a natural inclination in them that's drawn to the kinds of things that church is, particularly real church. Okay? Now, I want to make a distinction between what we sometimes give them and what they really desire. Okay? They have a hunger for deeper things. Okay? Here's one quick example. I had a discipleship group I was working with a couple years ago, and I took this group of sophomore boys to the opera. Now you would just think, like, what in the world, right? Now, leading up to it for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, I had to buy tickets. I told them they all had to dress up. They had to wear ties. I just made a big deal out of this thing as it was looming, right? They kept complaining, right? This is the fundamental difference that I'm trying to convey. You can't look at a teenager and just accept what's on the cover. You have to know what they need. You have to know what they actually long for, not what they say they want. Right? So many parishes around the country, how do we do youth ministry? We get the kids together and we ask them, what do you want? Horrible approach to youth ministry. As adults, we should know what they need more than they do. Right? And then we craft something that meets their deep needs, their deep longings. We know that fundamentally as human beings. Right? But there's this whole thing going on in our modern culture where kids are the boss. Right? Some of the people with big television shows today, they have actually made comments, or some quotes in like secular culture, where they'll actually make comments that we don't want. How is this articulated? The modern hierarchy of the family has been flattened into a democracy. Or better yet for us, I'm trying to quote this because it's an exact quote from an executive of like one of the large, like Nickelodeon or something like that. The modern family has been flattened into a democracy. Or better yet for us, The kids are running the show. Why? Why would that be better for them?
They can manipulate kids easier than adults.
All money. Right? And actually, if you go back into the early 80s with the birth of MTV, everything's been driven by money ever since. Right? The big people running programming today would say, easier to manipulate kids, but kids can tell, if kids are running the show, they can tell their parents what to spend the money on. And the whole thing is just this huge, huge industry, right? So I take this group of kids to the opera because I know that they need something like this, right? They're fighting me the entire way, up until the day that we're actually going and walking, we parked the car, we're walking the sidewalk to the Denver Center for Performing Arts. They're complaining. We get into the lobby, nobody is wearing ties. People are wearing jeans and t-shirts. I'm like, heck, this is not how you go to the opera. So like they're all looking, the first thing we walk in the room is like, and I'm like, when you went to things like this, you used to dress up. And I was like, it's just the right thing to do. It's like going to mass, like you dress nice. And it was like, so some of them wanted to take their ties off. I was like, no, we're not taking our ties off. Like, we've been planning to dress up for this thing for 3 weeks. We're dressing up. We go in, right? The first 10, 15 minutes were horrible because they start hearing the music. We went to Mozart's Requiem. And, so the whole first part of it was just like painful. They're looking at me and it's like, it's horrible, And so I just kind of stopped engaging with them and just started listening, sometimes even closing my eyes. So what ends up happening is one of the kids is taking Latin pretty early, but enough that they could start recognizing words. They look at the program and they realize, holy smoke, everything here is being sung in Latin. So that he starts whispering, saying like, he starts interpreting. Next thing you know, they start huddling around, and the one kid is interpreting all of the music as it's being sung, and they're listening to every word, and they keep sitting up and they're looking, and I've never seen them get so into something, right? Yeah.
Not lucky.
Yeah, it was all divine providence. I knew that something like this would touch them deeply if they could be receptive to it. And that's what I was hoping for, was for them to have a spiritual experience. Right? When we leave, no one said a word. When the thing's over, no one talked. We get outside, we walk down the street. We had planned to go to this little restaurant downtown to eat lunch, or even dinner after it was over. And the whole way, because I'm just letting it be this pregnant time. No one talks. We get to the restaurant, we're standing there for 10 minutes waiting for our table. We sit down at our table, nobody talks. I'm just looking at them. They're just all, and then all of a sudden, this one kid says, I don't think I've ever had anything touch me like that in my whole life. Right? I knew what their needs were. I knew what their hunger was. And so I exposed them to something that would tap into that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's very, very different than what I think we do with youth ministry. Right?
How long did it take you to know what they needed? And how did you know that? How did you know?
I know what I need. I think there's a fundamental understanding of what just our human needs are. By understanding who we are, how we're designed, how we're made, anthropology, I guess, of the human person, that's really understanding our own human nature. We need silence. We need intimacy. We need truth, right? I think understanding those deeper undercurrents of things that are just basic human needs, but they're actually deprived to us from our culture. Like our cultural context literally deprives us. Like there is no truth, right? 95% of modern teenagers don't believe there's an absolute truth. 95%, right? So you stand up in front of a group of teenagers today and try and give a talk. You're dead in the water before you even start, because at the flip of a switch, any of them can just say, well, maybe that's true for you, right? But if they don't believe fundamentally in an objective truth, how do you, right? But that's the cultural context, but they actually have a deep need, a deep hunger for truth. Like it's just a human craving. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think that's what you want to get in touch with. So I'm spending a lot of time, more time than I wanted to on this first point. So the myths: teens hate their parents, teens need to be independent adults, teens don't like church. These aren't on your handout. Teens are rebellious, right? Increasingly rebellious. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, right? It's just not true. I don't know what the statistics are here in Canada, but I know that they are similar trends as the United States. Kids are actually getting better and better. They're calling the goody-goody generation. They're tending to be less into drugs, less into. They're still there. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not there at all, but percentage-wise, it's much, much lower than previous generations, right? Teens are immature. They're not capable of serious relationships. Myth. Teens aren't capable of serious faith decisions. Myth. Okay? So if those are the myths about kids, and you may not believe me about all of those, like I said, you could go read the chapter because I provide sources that give statistical data about this stuff that is just not true, right? Look at youth ministry. Youth ministry is all a schematic that's formed around those myths. Because kids hate their parents, we need to create an environment that's completely devoid of their parents. Because teens can't handle adults or don't really like adults, we need to create an environment that's completely isolated from adults. And if there are adults, they need to be just a few years older than them, who haven't really decided what they're doing with their life or where they're at with their faith either. Okay? It's like sending somebody out to ski on the bunny slope. Right? Any of you skiers?
Yeah, no, not the bunny slope. I know.
These Colorado analogies just don't work. Worst place in the world to learn to ski is the bunny slope. When I take people to ski, I never take them to the bunny slope, because all you're doing is surrounded by people who don't know what they're doing. Right? And it's just a bunch of people falling down on the ground and making, stains with their clothes on the snow. Best place for somebody to learn how to ski is to go up to a light incline where they can see other people who are actually doing it. Right? Mass and youth ministry needs to be entertaining. Right? Because teens don't like church, because they're not capable of serious faith decisions, we got to entertain them. That's actually, the first statement is a myth. So what we're doing with the way that we teach, the way that we catechize, even the way that we try to craft liturgy, it's all rooted in these myths. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
And because they're not capable of serious relationships, we need to keep things more social, engaging, fun, entertaining. Right? So this is the context for understanding discipleship. So that's my conviction, is that a lot of the ways that we do youth ministry is really rooted in a series of myths about kids. And something needs to change, right? I almost, this is the way that I articulate it. Like, you have a kid who comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm so hungry. Here, have a piece of cake." Well, first of all, cake's not really going to satisfy their hunger. It's actually going to make them more hungry, and it's unhealthy. It's kind of unhealthy for them if they're hungry, right? Like maybe as dessert after you had a meal, right? I don't really want a piece of cake. And I truly believe that kids in their own way are actually communicating this to the church. I don't really want a piece of cake. I don't want to just be entertained. Can I have a steak? No. Just have a piece of cake, right? Cake, and more cake is what we just keep saying. And I have experienced over the last 10, 15 years running through 3 different groups of kids where I've discipled them from freshman or sophomore year all the way till their graduation, and seeing it now working in parishes all over the country. I'm just absolutely convinced that if you give kids intentional discipleship, they're hungry for it, they respond to it, and you start getting traction with it in their life. And I just watch them be transformed. Pope Francis said, Young people often fail to find responses to their concerns, needs, problems, and hurts in the usual structures. As adults, we find it hard to listen patiently to them, to appreciate their concerns and demands, and to speak to them in a language they can understand. One of the things that I think is powerful about this quote is, notice that he's not saying, just talk their language. Just talk to them about what they want to talk to them. He's saying, talk to them in a language that they can understand. Okay? To me, that communicates more translation. And I think that sometimes what we have a tendency to do is we actually alter the message. We don't have something that we're actually trying to transmit to them. We just kind of get into their world and become them. Right? And we have to see ourselves as adults having something that they desperately need. And we're getting into their life. And yes, we have to translate it in order to transmit it. We have to understand their values. We have to understand even their lingo and the things that are important to them. But the whole idea is like, I've got a safety vest. I've got a life raft, and I can save you. So the whole idea of me getting into your world is to pull you into mine, not to stay here with you, right? It's all about discipleship, right? You're familiar with this? Yes, question.
Yeah, I just want to say, Jim, that speaks to me pretty heavily, because I know I took my confirmation class a couple weeks ago, and I kind of did like an apologetics 201 with them, where I just flew through like kind of all the hot button issues with them, and I mean, so we got into some pretty heavy stuff, and I'm thinking like, I'm just talking at these kids, and they're not getting anything out of this, and at the end of the night, I just talked, and I didn't feel confident about what I got. But I've received more emails from that youth night than I did, positive emails from parents than I ever did from anything else that I ever did in ministry, from kids saying like, I got answers to my questions. Like I had all these questions with the church, and they were answered, and they sounded right, you know? So it's just listening to the questions that I heard the whole year, and that was the most, it wasn't fun, it wasn't, we weren't running around playing games and stuff like that, even though we lost that necessary. But it's that one really kind of getting petty, getting into the nitty-gritty.
That's awesome. That's a great example. And this would be, I mean, that validates what I'm saying. I just believe kids are hungry for those kinds of meaningful conversations. And like I said, there's studies actually that have shown that high percentages of them say that that's one of their strongest desires, to be able to have those kinds of conversations.
Listening to you and thinking back on my own children, I realized that one of the things that was missing for me was adult formation, so that I could actually engage with my own children in the way they were suggesting. Because I would just have to say, well, this is the way we do it, as opposed to having some, way to have a meaningful conversation about different issues. And as a result, I think they've fallen away because, that I didn't have that opportunity, which I rectified, but that doesn't mean that I can do anything about my own children. So I think that it's important not only for the kids that we're dealing with, but for the adults that are dealing with them to become more engaged in following discipleship so that they are more knowledgeable and, as Ronnie did with his group, are able to actually share
Right.
what is
Yep.
important.
Like, isn't this one of the greatest poverties in the church today? We have an entire generation of kids that I think are hungry to be discipled. We have a generation of adults that were never discipled themselves.
Yeah.
And so you may find yourself actually in this whole session saying, wait a minute, how can I possibly do this? Everyone knows the old adage, you can't give what you don't have. So if I wasn't discipled, if I don't know the faith like this, how can I actually do this? And I'll speak to that before we end.
I was struck by what you said about, that we structure youth ministry to isolate, because we think, based on that myth, that teens need to be, or young people need to be set apart. So I'm curious, more in your own youth ministry, how you break down that isolation. Like, we're actually, where I live, we're exploring something we call the food family baking tent. And the idea is that, based on not only that young
same thing with our parish.
Okay.
The youth ministry, which has been very successful, we've had hundreds of kids involved over the years. I'm not the youth minister at the parish anymore, so I left there, almost 10 years ago now. But the two youth ministers who are there are former teams of mine. I mentor them, I meet with them a couple times a month between the two of them. And they have seen the shifts and the changes and resonate with a lot of the kinds of things that I say. But they let me have a lot of involvement with stuff in the parish, even though I'm not really the person there running things. And I work with a lot of the parents. So I do discipleship with parents. And so I'll spend a year, sometimes a little bit longer, with a group of 6, 8, 10 parents, discipling them. And then empowering them to disciple small groups of other parents. So I've done it now. I'm on my second round over these last couple of years. But the whole idea is we want to get to the point where we just have tons of parents who are disciple makers and can disciple other small groups of parents. But that comes around the youth ministry where instead of going on a fall retreat with just the teenagers and the parents are home, we actually go on a family retreat. And we bring some of the people from the younger, from the RE, called religious ed, for the younger children to do some programming for them at different times. Stuff going on for the teens, stuff going on for the parents, but many times we're doing stuff with everyone all together. Because that's exactly what we're trying to do, is trying to break down these barriers where so many of the ministries in the church have actually fragmented families. How do we bring that back together?
I've been doing ministry at St. Benedict Parish for 3 years, and when I came into doing youth ministry there on a weekly basis, we see about 30 to 40 kids. And when I was looking at starting out my leadership team, I thought, okay, I gotta meet young adults, like we were talking about at the beginning, right? I gotta get a whole bunch of university age people. And I have some of those, but the majority of people sign up with parents. So I'm like, I don't know how this is gonna work out.
Kids don't like their parents.
And now we see 70 to 90 kids show up on a weekly basis, close to 100 sometimes, who are coming to the ministry, and the parents are the ones who are running the bus. It's not not trying to give a pat on the back, or whatever my role is. It's all my leaders, and the majority of them are parents, but kids are looking for them.
Yeah, I'm actually convinced that the best kind of dynamic, and we're going to talk about the framework here at the end, but I think the best kind of dynamic for discipleship is a small group of 6 to 8 kids with a parent or two and a young adult. Because the young adult actually, it's not like they're more effective at discipling, but there are certain things that as a parent I'm not going to be able to do with my kid, like particularly around more intimate issues, sexuality, things like that. Like there's just going to be things where my kids are going to be awkward talking to me. I can still speak into those things, but it's actually much better for them to have a young adult that's closer in age that can identify and talk to those kinds of struggles. So we've created this dynamic in some of our discipleship groups where you have a parent or two that's actually a part of the discipleship group. They meet frequently with them, not all the time, but the kids all know the parent leaders, and the parents are starting to cultivate relationships with them, and it's actually easier for the parent to do that than the young adult, because their kid actually gets them connected with all of their other friends in the group, right? And so there's a certain organic nature to the relationships where it just happens more quickly for the parent. But then the young adult who has more time and more capacity in their life for the one-on-one relationship, they do a lot of the relationship ministry with the kids that over time really starts to cement the group, right? Well, as one of the parent leaders in a discipleship group, what's one of my other key priorities? The other parent. So I'm actually doing barbecues or cookouts or family gatherings, throughout the year to try and bring the discipleship group and all of their parents together. And I keep looking for capacity, thresholds of conversion. I'm trying to benchmark where are these parents at with their faith? How can I help them grow and develop? Because ideally, if you can get a parent discipling their own child, you set that kid up for lifelong discipleship.
Jim, my parents who host my discipleship group is different.
There you go. So, I'm going really slow here. So this is a great image for us. I actually like it, if you're okay with
Yeah.
instead of me giving all of the content and having 20 minutes of discussion, if we do this back and forth, right? This is a great image for us, the disciples on the road to Emmaus, because, like, just think about this contextually, right? Where are the disciples going?
Away.
Away. So where's the church? In Jerusalem. They're going to Emmaus. And what does the Lord do? He meets them where they are and actually walks with them where they're going. It's a beautiful image of what real evangelization, that piece which actually happens before discipleship. We've got to meet people, and we've got to be willing sometimes even to walk with them when it seems like they're going the wrong direction, right? The beautiful thing that I love is look at what the Lord did. He talks to them as they're walking along the way, and then they get to Emmaus, and what happens? Why though? Where is he going? I mean, it's actually in the scripture. It seemed like he had somewhere else to go. He was just dead. He just rose. He has nowhere to go. Nowhere. But he made it appear like he had somewhere else he needed to go. Why? This is a critical youth ministry principle and a critical discipleship principle. He wanted to stir up desire. He wanted them to say, stay. He wanted them to articulate, no, let's keep talking. Right? He didn't need to do that. He could have just said, hey, let's grab dinner. Right? Sometimes as adults, what do? A kid asks us a question, and we just fire hose them with the answer. We give them 10 times what they really needed, right? Does anyone do this? I do this all the time, right? Or it's like, I'm so excited that they finally asked me a question. I was like, I'm going to give you the answer. Like, let me tell you about mystagogy. I'm going to tell you all, man, right? There's this beautiful principle of discipleship that I call progressive growth, right? You want to give a kid enough to make them hungry for more and stop. It happens in little bite-sized chunks, right? And the biggest part of it is helping them to assimilate. I've got to take some principle of faith and actually talk about what does it look like in my life to live this, right? To me, that's the hard work, the heavy lifting of discipleship, is putting things into practice, and I'll show that here in a minute. So this is from the General Directory for Catechesis, and I'm just trying to give a definition for discipleship. There's lots of different ones you could use, but I think this is a pretty good working definition. I put the whole quote on your handout, not on the slide, right? The Christian faith is above all conversion to Jesus Christ, full and sincere adherence to his person, and the decision to walk in his footsteps. Faith is a personal encounter with Jesus Christ, making of oneself a disciple of him. This demands a permanent commitment to think like him, to judge like him, and to live as he lived. In this way, the believer unites himself to the community of disciples and appropriates the faith of the church. So if that's a working definition of discipleship, it requires conversion. Right? I love Sherry Waddell's articulation of this. She talks about these 3 converging spiritual journeys. Right? She actually lists them in a different order. In her book, she talks about this one first, which to me doesn't make sense, because I think this is the order that we experience it in people, right? The ecclesial journey is the reception of sacraments, right? Everyone gets that, because parents will jump through amazing hoops to get their kids to receive the sacrament as they grow up, right? And then they seem to have no more interest in faith. It's like you get something with that, right? So I'll jump through the hoops to get the thing, right? journey of active practice is less. So you have a high percentage of Catholics that will have this. A lower percentage that would be like weekly Mass attendance, or maybe even attend Mass more often than Sunday, right? A lot of Christmas and Easter Catholics, a lot of people who are sporadic depending upon sports season with Mass attendance. So the journey of active practice is even a smaller percentage, right? Well, there's even a smaller percentage of this. People who actually have spiritually come away. They recognize a relationship, a lived relationship with Christ, and it makes sense to them. Right? What Sherry articulates, and I really agree, is all three of these journeys have to converge in a person's life for them to really get traction as a disciple. Which, in some ways, it's kind of taking conversion and pulling it apart like a watch to understand the moving parts and to be able to give some type of an assessment of like where is somebody at in terms of their conversion, right? If somebody can talk to you about how they've received the sacraments with any sense of knowledge, that gives you some understanding of their ecclesial journey. If they can talk about actively participating in church and going to Mass and receiving sacraments and going to confessions, right? That tells you something about where they're at with their conversion. If they can speak about a relationship with Christ and with the Trinity, experiencing God in prayer, that tells you a lot about their conversion. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's look at what discipleship. I call these hinging realities. Okay, and this is the diagram that I'm putting on there. And again, this is all in an effort to kind of land at what's a framework that we could kind of throw out there that paints a picture of what intentional discipleship might look like with teenagers. But I think these are what I would call these hinging realities. They're the stuff of discipleship that it just has to be there for real discipleship to happen. You've got to be in relationship with someone. I'm going to talk on the next slide about the 4 earmarks of a discipleship approach. And intimacy is the first one, right? You have to have a relationship with a person in order to disciple them. You literally can't do it without that, right? So you can't just throw a DVD into the DVD player and hit play and watch discipleship unfold in front of you. It won't work, right? Now, if you have a relationship with somebody and you're discipling them and you're working with them in their life, and you use a DVD series for the content to fuel your discussion, that's a completely different thing. I'm a big believer. You got to have content. I put it on my map, right? Here's the problem with youth ministry. Over the last 30, 40 years, this is all we've ever talked about. Right? You can go back to Baltimore Catechism era, where all we did was content, right? Or youth ministries 70s and 80s, where all we did was relationship, and there was no catechesis, right? So this is, I don't know if this is as prevalent here as it is in the United States. It is, okay? I mean, like, we vacillated back and forth between these things for years. I think we've landed a little bit more of a middle point, right? But no one's talking about this. It's never even been a part of the conversation. How do you mentor someone in the faith? I just am absolutely convinced that this is actually the gaping hole in the church today, not just for youth ministries, but everything. I mean, we've got people, if it was all about content, even if it was just about relationship and content, right? We've got parishes all over the country in the United States going through one Bible timeline study after another. I mean, Ascension Press cannot keep up with the demand. They keep trying to pump out a new one every semester because the parish groups are like, give us another one, give us another one, right? And you've got people that literally have gone through 10, 15 classes on different Bible studies. What do you think has happened in those parishes? Absolutely nothing. It hasn't changed those people at all. Content doesn't change somebody.
Well, I would make a case, of course, for that Trinity culture dependency.
Yeah. It's like a bunch of little piggies come into a trough.
Well,
Feed me, feed me, feed me.
Listen, worse than a pig, because eventually a pig you take to the market to slaughter. These pigs.
Okay, can we cut that off the tape?
I'll put my name behind that.
Okay.
But especially in this diocese, it's very prevalent that we feed, and we never mentor people into disciples. So they come to things like this, and they come year after year after year, no offense to anyone in the room, and they never enter into active ministry.
You know, we're not making the step of modeling and assimilating the faith. Right? And again, I know a lot of you will start to think, wait a second, this was never done for me. How can I actually do this for somebody else? Right? And I am going to address that. But to me, you've got to have all three of these hinging realities. I put these characteristics around this because to me, like this is in a certain sense, it's a scheme for discipleship. You've got to have relationship, you've got to have content, but you've got to model, you've got to mentor someone in putting it into action, right? Because the whole goal is to take a person and actually empower them to be a disciple maker, but eventually for them to be a spiritual multiplier, right? So we have a bunch of different levels of growth that we're looking for. Obviously, we want someone to be a convert. We want them to have a conversion experience. All three of those converging journeys coming together, right? But that's not the goal, right? If that was the goal, then we would do a bunch of Super Bowl youth conferences all over the country and get people to that moment of encountering Christ, and then we'd be done. Right? That clearly doesn't get the job done, right? So convert isn't the end of the line, right? Convert then becomes a growing disciple. Somebody who's growing in the faith, is being mentored in the faith, is assimilating the faith, putting it into practice in their life, right? But then a growing disciple at some point needs to become a commissioned disciple. They see themselves as on mission, tied up with what the church is all about, what the church is meant to be accomplishing in the world, which is to bring conversion to every single person, four corners of the earth, right? But that's not even the end of the line. A commissioned disciple needs to become a disciple maker, someone who's capable of discipling others. But that's not even the end. The ultimate goal is we want to raise up spiritual multipliers, people who can make other disciple makers. And this to me is the fundamental problem in the church today. I'm in the Archdiocese of Denver. I look out over the landscape of our archdiocese, big picture, and I could count on one or two hands the number of spiritual multipliers in our archdiocese. How is that possible? We've got the Augustine Institute there where I teach at. We've got Focus and tons of Focus missionaries that have done Focus on college campuses, and they come back after they're done, and they're not really spiritual multipliers in their parish, in the setting that they're in. We've got, the seminary is pumping out, we've got 100 seminarians who are going to be ordained priests, and each year a new class of ordained priests. I don't even see spiritual multipliers among our priests. Some people get really offended when I say that, but I'm sorry, it's just true, right? We're not raising, we've gotten to a point where I think we're making more disciple makers. More commissioned disciples and more disciple makers, but we don't have spiritual multipliers. And that's a leadership issue, I think. And how do we address that, right? So does this make sense?
Yeah.
The kinds of characteristics and things we need. So here I'm getting to the framework. And this will be kind of where I'll land, and I want you to ask lots of questions. So, again, my whole point is, like, I can't give you a silver bullet, I can't give you a program, but I can create the scaffolding, right, that you build a discipleship ministry around. What are the kinds of things that have to be there? Right? So here's what we could identify as the 4 earmarks of a discipleship approach. Now, I want to be really clear. The Catholic Church, the sacramental life of the church, the infusion of grace is understood. Okay? I've had people who criticize me because I throw these up on the board and they say, what about the Eucharist? I can't believe you don't know. Listen. Okay, okay, permission to play, right? The Eucharist, the sacramental life of the church, grace, those things are inherent in what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the 4 earmarks of an approach of the way you make things. Intimacy. You've got to have not just relationship, but intimate relationship with someone for real discipleship. Intimacy is messy. Remember we were talking, you asked the question like, how do you know those deep human needs, right? One of the deep human needs is intimacy. Where we can point to all kinds of sociological studies over the years that have shown people deprived of intimacy, what happens? They become weird, right? Psychotic. Right? People need intimacy. Right? What are kids most deprived of? Intimacy.
Just as an aside, that one of the things that in studies that show what kids who want to graduation is a meaningful relationship with an adult. So if a child does not have a meaningful relationship with an adult within the school, they don't think.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the same thing would
Yeah,
be
there-
happening in this process.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of studies that would validate this from all different angles, right?
Exactly.
So the intimacy is critical. You've got to have that kind of intimate relationship with them. And I think one of the challenges to this, in my experience now, doing this a number of times with different groups of kids, they don't know how to handle it, right? So you got to think about it like somebody who's starved, right? Somebody's been out in the desert for several months and have just not eaten. You're not going to bring them in to give them a steak dinner. You kill them. You literally would kill them, right? If you gave them too much food too fast. You got to think about intimacy like that. Okay? The modern generation of kids, they're starved with intimacy. Not even from their own family. They're not even really getting intimate dialogue and regular intimate conversations with their own parents. So what has a tendency to happen is when you tap into the need, right, one of two things will happen. Either a kid will get scared and go real bad because they haven't experienced it before and they don't know how to handle it. Or they'll floodgate you. And you actually have to temper them and stop them from saying too much. So I find, like as an adult, I just have to know what healthy is, and I'm the one that keeps setting the temperature, right? And so I'll bring them into, and again, gradually progressive experiences of deeper and deeper intimacy. If I go too fast, right, it's actually not going to serve them, it's a backfire on me. So does that make sense? The intimacy is a critical earmark. You have to be careful how you navigate through it. Mutual responsibility. Here's the biggest flaw with discipleship. I disciple you, and so I'm the one that drives everything. It actually doesn't. I mean, this is going to be the greatest thing. And this is where I said I'm going to tell you, those of you who have never been discipled, it's okay. If you may sit there thinking, I can't disciple because no one ever discipled me. So how am I going to give what I never had? I would say about 75% of discipleship is driven by the person being discipled. It's mutual responsibility, but it's not 50-50. Like as a discipler, I'm empowering a person that I'm discipling to take responsibility for themselves. I'm empowering them to be self-directed, self-managed, and self-evaluated. And it's the greatest thing that I can ever do for them in their life. For me to actually take over and drive everything is going to cripple them. It's like taking a caterpillar and trying to help it get out of its cocoon and become a butterfly. I'll cripple it for life and it won't actually be able to fly. Right? Like my job is to create the environment that allows them to grow. I help them identify gaps or areas where they need to grow. I help them access resources that give them information and knowledge and understanding, and then I hold them accountable to life change. This is what discipleship is, right? So if 75% of the responsibility actually falls on the one being discipled, then what can all of you do who have never been discipled? Pursue other people who can mentor you in certain areas where you see that you need growth, and engage them in relationships for short stints of time. I call them individual learning plans or individual formation plans. Right? We use these in education all the time, in public education models. But an individual formation plan, like I have an individual formation plan in my life working all the time. I'm constantly identifying areas where I need to grow as a disciple. I'm allowing the Lord to reveal to me. I'm in spiritual direction. My spiritual director helps me see things. And I start creating a map over the next 4 to 6 months. I never go more than 6 months at a time because I don't have control over that. Right? But 4 to 6 months window, I can look at how can I grow in a certain area in my life. So this past year, one of the big things that I was looking at was self-mastery. So I asked some things to my spiritual director. I picked up a couple of books that I read, through Lent and through the Easter season, and I've experienced some significant growth. I lost 25 pounds in the process. A lot of fasting, a lot of things that I was employing, and I've learned a ton of stuff that I never knew. Right? I turned 50 next week. Who would have thought that I could still learn something? That I can still grow, right? Does this make sense? Like, every single one of you can actually still pursue discipleship for yourself, because 75% of discipleship actually all depends upon you being empowered. I think there's more resources available to us today than any other generation in the history of the church. Even if you just start with the catechism, right? Like you can go to the catechism of the Catholic Church into the index. Just about every single thing that you could ever think of that you need to grow in your life, you're going to be able to find the word in the index of the catechism.
But also what you see,
when you talk about there's a lack of spiritual multipliers, and even in your own triangle, I think maybe that's what some people are speaking to. That's a key component, and there are the resources there, and that's what's missing, and that's where maybe people are struggling.
Right.
How do you, so it seems to me from what we're saying that there needs to be some way to build up that side of the triangle.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that's happening in the church here is I think there's more and more people who are starting to come to a fuller understanding of this. And again, but I would say to you, I know that that's your experience, but I bet you there's 50% of the people in this room that could do it for you right now if you just ask them. There's people sitting right here that have done that, have been pursuing it, and they would love to be a companion and walk with you if you need some help. Anyone, raise your hand if you would be willing to be in a role like that. See what I'm saying? Like they're around, but again, we live in a culture that is literally isolating us from each other. We're isolated. We're very individualistic. We don't want to ask other people. We don't want a companion. We don't want to walk with.
It's very ironic, I think, that well, we find people who are in ministry, this is what my experience has been. People in ministry, I'm dying to have someone like mentor to take this role on, and then people who want to be mentors who say, I don't know who to go to, and we exist as two entities. We have a small group of people who take on a million things as a parish. We have a large group of people who want to take on things, and yet we never come together.
And I would say the other side of that is that you sometimes go to somebody and you say, okay, do this for me. That's not mutual responsibility, right? I have to take the ownership and responsibility of some area where I want to grow. And I'm not going to go to one person and say, look, impart all of this to me.
Yeah.
I actually have a number of different mentors in all kinds of different areas. There's certain people, like my spiritual director is very good mentoring me in deeper spirituality and intimacy in the spirit. Right? I have another dad, an kids are raised, and I really respect, I look at his children, and I think, I want my kids to be like that as adults. I get together with him like once a month or once every 6 weeks and just talk to him about struggles that I'm having in the way that I can.
Find someone who knows.
If you identify an area of need, and you start prayerfully asking the Lord to guide you and direct you to somebody who can mentor you in that, I think that helps. What's that? Yeah, actually, most of mine aren't either. You had something you wanted to say too? I'm realizing I'm running out of time here. Let me, because I want to get to the last slide. I just kind of explain the framework, right? So these are the 4 earmarks: intimacy, mutual responsibility, customization. Remember I said earlier that I just find discipleship is different for every single kid. Discipleship has to be uniquely customized around an individual, and that's why it can't be a program. It just doesn't work. There's aspects of a program that will work for each kid, but you've got to find which one clicks and how the kid's wired, and then accountability. I would add to this accountability for life change. So through intimacy, I help a person identify where do they need to grow at this particular point in their life. I customize an individual formation plan. I help them customize an individual formation plan for themselves, and I hold them accountable to life change. How are they going to take principles that they're learning about faith and about what we believe and put it into practice in their life? And then I model that for them. This is how I do it in my life. Right? So I teach, show, try, do. That's mentoring in a nutshell. I teach them about the principles. I show them how I do it in my life. I let them try it while I'm there and can help them fumble through the process. But eventually they can do it on their own. Right? And to me, like, that's the heart of discipleship. So this last slide here is the framework of this. How would you do this in a parish with teenagers? You've got to engage parents. And I talked about the whole small group context where parents are actually one of the leaders in the group, right? Engaging the parents. Raise the bar of formation for the parents and for other leaders. So this is to the point we've talked about numerous times. The adults have to be constantly growing in their faith. You have to empower the adults to be disciples themselves and to be pursuing the things that they need, right? Setting up teams and mentoring relationships. And I think a lot of the sacramental prep that we already do in the church lends itself actually to it. Point teams to the sacramental life of the church, get them frequently in the sacraments. Conversational catechesis. I really would say over the last 15 years that I've done this with several different groups now of teenagers, 90% of the discipleship doesn't happen when the discipleship group is weird. It all happens in the one-on-one relationship outside of the discipleship group. The discipleship group meeting is where we sometimes will do common learning, shared learning. We'll do a study together, or we'll do a Bible study, or watch a video, or something that gets the conversation going. But it's the later one-on-one relationship where the kid is wrestling with how do I live this? And to me, that conversational catechesis is much more where the real discipleship happens. Small group context for connecting in ministry, I think 6 to 8 is about max. And unless you're a full-time paid youth minister, where you have a greater capacity for relationship, I think 6 to 8 is about max. Large group activity becomes all the small groups coming together. Right? This is a flipping youth ministry upside down. I think. Right? We typically approach youth ministry, get a bunch of kids together in a large group, and then break them up into small groups when we need to, right? I think you have to turn that all around. Youth ministry needs to be primarily about connecting and engaging kids in small group discipleship. And then periodically you'll do large group things where you bring all the small groups together and invite other kids who maybe aren't in a small group. Those can be more evangelistic outreach companies, right? Focus on the four areas. That means it's time to end. Focus on the
If
four.
there are any virtual reality fans here today, we have an Oculus Rift as part of Doors Open. Come try it out in the Creative Lab on the second floor.
My next workshop is on virtual discipleship. Focus on the four areas of formation. I'm not going to go into that a lot, but intellectual, spiritual, human, pastoral. And then stay true to the earmarks. Intimacy, mutual responsibility, customization, accountability, life change. And then live out the sacramental life of the church. But really, what is the stuff of the church? Shared prayer, shared fellowship, shared learning, shared mission. Acts 2:42. I mean, this is the stuff that we do in the church. That is the church in a nutshell, right? If you just do those things in a small group context intentionally with young people, discipleship, that is the environment and kind of the fallow ground where discipleship happens. Okay? You got to wait lunch. I'm happy to continue to answer questions, but if you need to leave, feel free to. Why don't we close with a glory be, and then people can feel free to move on to lunch. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was